A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
You know, I was looking at a map of Switzerland the other day, and if you did not know any better, you would think the whole country was just a giant, peaceful chocolate factory nestled in the high peaks of the Alps. But today's prompt from Daniel is pulling back the curtain on the reality beneath those mountains. He wants us to look at the Swiss model for home shelters and compare it to the Israeli program of safe rooms, or mamats, specifically from an engineering and preparedness perspective.
It is a fascinating comparison because you are looking at two different engineering solutions for two very different sets of existential anxieties. I am Herman Poppleberry, by the way, and I have spent the last few days buried in Swiss civil defense manuals and Israeli building codes. The contrast is stark. You have the Swiss deep shelter infrastructure, which is essentially designed for the end of the world, versus the Israeli mamad, which is designed for the reality of Tuesday afternoon.
Right, because in Israel you might have 15 to 90 seconds to get to safety, whereas in Switzerland, the assumption for decades was that you would have enough time to seal yourself in for a nuclear winter. Before we get into the concrete and steel, we should probably address the elephant in the room regarding Switzerland. Daniel asked about the neutrality paradox. Why is a country that has not fought a foreign war since 1815 so obsessed with bunkers?
It is the concept of armed neutrality, or what military theorists call the porcupine strategy. The idea is that you make yourself so difficult and painful to invade that no one bothers, but the engineering requirement for that is massive. Since the 1960s, Switzerland has had a legal mandate that every inhabitant must have a protected place in a shelter near their home. We are talking about nearly 9 million shelter spaces for a population of 8.5 million. They have over 100% coverage.
That is an incredible engineering feat. Most countries struggle to build enough affordable housing, and the Swiss managed to build an entire shadow country underground. Let us talk about the specifications. When we say a Swiss shelter or a zivilschutzraum, what are we actually looking at in terms of the build?
From an engineering standpoint, these are heavy duty. We are talking about reinforced concrete walls that are at least 30 centimeters thick. That is nearly a foot of high-grade concrete. The doors are the real marvel, though. They are massive steel reinforced concrete slabs, often weighing several hundred kilograms, set on heavy-duty hinges with a mechanical lever system to create a gas-tight seal. These are not just doors. They are pressure-rated barriers designed to withstand the overpressure of a nearby nuclear blast.
And these are not just in government buildings. These are in the basements of private homes, right?
In every apartment building or single-family home built after a certain date, that basement is a fortress. One of the key requirements that Daniel asked about is the inspection cycle. The Swiss do not just build these and forget them. Local municipalities are required to audit private shelters every 10 years. An inspector comes to your house, checks the rubber gaskets on the blast doors to make sure they have not dry rotted, tests the ventilation system, and ensures you have not turned the emergency exit into a permanent wine rack that cannot be moved.
I love that. The image of a Swiss inspector measuring the airtightness of a basement while the homeowner nervously moves their Pinot Noir is very on brand. But you mentioned the ventilation. That seems like a huge point of failure if you are staying underground for a long time.
It is the most critical component. These shelters use a system called a KVA or a similar filtration unit. It is a manual or electric crank system with a high-efficiency particulate air filter and a carbon filter to scrub out chemical or biological agents and radioactive fallout. The engineering requirement is that the air pressure inside the shelter must be slightly higher than the pressure outside. That way, if there is a tiny leak, the clean air pushes out instead of the contaminated air leaking in.
Now, compare that to the Israeli Mamad. For those who did not catch our deep dive in episode 601, the Mamad is a Merkav Muga Dirati, or an apartment-protected space. It is a room inside your actual living space, not in the basement. Herman, how does the engineering philosophy differ there?
The mamad is a structural core. In a modern Israeli apartment building, the mamads are stacked one on top of the other from the ground floor to the roof. This creates a reinforced concrete spine for the entire building. If the rest of the building takes a hit and partially collapses, that stack of mamads is designed to stand like a pillar. The walls are typically 20 to 30 centimeters of reinforced concrete, but the focus is on blast pressure and shrapnel rather than long-term nuclear radiation.
The accessibility is the key difference. If you are in Sderot or Ashkelon, you have seconds. You cannot run to a basement 3 floors down and dog bolt a 300-kilogram door. You just step into the next room and close a heavy steel shutter.
And that shutter is a specific piece of engineering. It is a dual-layer system. You have a heavy steel blast plate that slides or swings over the window, and then an inner gas-tight glass window. The goal is to stop the overpressure wave from a rocket impact. But here is the thing. Daniel asked about the maintenance and the firearm aspect in Switzerland, which is where the cultural side of this engineering gets interesting.
Let us clear up the firearm myth first. People always say every Swiss man has a fully automatic rifle and a crate of ammo in his closet. What is the actual status there in 2026?
It changed significantly in 2007. While most Swiss men who have completed their military service still keep their government-issued rifle at home, they no longer keep the ammunition. The Taschenmunition, or pocket ammunition, which was a sealed box of 50 rounds, was recalled by the government. The idea was to prevent domestic incidents and suicides. Now, the ammo is kept in centralized government arsenals. So, the rifle is there, but the ability to immediately engage in a firefight from your balcony is not the default anymore.
So the porcupine has needles, but the venom is kept in a central locker. That makes sense. But the preparedness mindset remains. Daniel mentioned how Switzerland is a bulwark of neutrality. If you are neutral, why spend billions on filters and concrete?
Because neutrality is a diplomatic status, not a physical shield. The Swiss saw what happened to neutral Belgium in the First World War and the Second World War. They realized that if you want people to respect your neutrality, you have to make the cost of violating it astronomical. From an engineering perspective, this means the entire country is rigged. They have famously wired their bridges and tunnels with explosives for decades, though they had been phasing some of that out recently. But the shelters are the ultimate insurance policy. If a nuclear exchange happened between major powers, Switzerland would be the only place where the entire civilian population could realistically survive the initial fallout.
It is a total defense strategy. Every citizen has a role. But I want to go back to the engineering of the Israeli Mamad for a second. You mentioned it acts as a spine for the building. Does that mean the Mamad is actually better at surviving a structural collapse than a Swiss basement shelter?
Potentially, yes. If a building collapses on a basement shelter, you have the problem of the rubble pile. The Swiss shelters have emergency escape tunnels that lead to a hatch in the yard away from the footprint of the house. But the Israeli Mamad is designed to stay upright even if the surrounding rooms are blown away. We saw this in some of the footage from recent conflicts where an entire apartment block is gutted, but the vertical column of Mamads is still standing. It is a brutalist but effective form of life-saving architecture.
There is also the dual-use factor. This is something both countries have had to navigate. You cannot just have a dead room in your house that you never use. In Israel, the mamad is usually a bedroom or an office. In Switzerland, the basement shelter is almost always a storage room or a workshop.
That creates an engineering challenge, though. If you use it as a room, you have to ensure that the vents are not blocked and the heavy door is not obstructed. The Israeli Homefront Command is very strict about not making structural changes to the mamad. You are not allowed to drill through the walls for air conditioning or cables unless you use a certified blast-proof sleeve. If you just drill a hole for an internet cable, you have compromised the gas-tight integrity of the room.
I remember we talked about that in episode 892, the engineering of survival. The smallest gap can be a lethal flaw when you are dealing with a pressure wave or chemical agents. Herman, what about the air filtration in the mamad? Is it as robust as the Swiss systems?
It has become more robust over time. Older Mahmuds relied on the gas-tight seals and people wearing gas masks inside. But after the threats of chemical warfare in the early 90s, newer standards require an active filtration system, very similar to the Swiss ones, but usually smaller. They are wall-mounted units that can pull in outside air through a series of filters. The difference is the duration. Swiss shelters are often stocked with enough supplies for weeks or months. The Israeli Mamad is usually stocked for a few days at most, because the threat model is intermittent rocket fire, not a multi-month nuclear siege.
It is the difference between a sprint and a marathon. The Israeli system is built for frequency. You might go in and out of that room 5 times in a single night. The Swiss system is built for a once-in-a-century catastrophe. But Daniel's question about why Switzerland is so concerned despite its status is really about the psychology of engineering. If you build it, you are prepared for the worst. If you do not build it, you are at the mercy of others.
And the Swiss do not like being at the mercy of anyone. There is a deep-seated cultural value of self-reliance. It is why they have the Zivilschutz, the civil protection organization. These are the people who are not in the army but are trained specifically to manage the shelters, provide first aid, and handle the logistics of an underground population. It is a massive coordinated effort. They even have underground hospitals. We are talking about fully equipped surgical theaters with heavy-duty air filtration and backup power, all carved into the granite of the mountains.
That is where the engineering gets truly sci-fi. The mountain fortresses. But for the average person, it is about that basement room. Herman, you mentioned the 10-year inspection. What happens if someone fails? Is there a fine?
There are definitely fines, and the municipality can order a contractor to come in and fix it at your expense. The Swiss take this very seriously because your shelter might not just be for you. If you have a larger basement, the government might designate part of it for neighbors whose older homes do not have adequate protection. So, if your shelter fails, you are potentially endangering the people next door.
That is a fascinating social contract. My basement is your safety net. In Israel, it is a bit more individualistic at the home level, but the collective defense is handled by the Iron Dome and the arrow systems. The Mamad is the final layer of a multi-tiered defense.
It is the belt and suspenders approach. The Iron Dome intercepts the vast majority of threats, but the Mamad is there for the 5% that get through or for the debris that falls after an interception. From an engineering standpoint, the Mamad has to be able to handle a direct hit from shrapnel and the overpressure of a nearby blast. The Swiss shelter is more about surviving the indirect effects of a massive exchange elsewhere.
Let us talk about the costs. Building a room out of reinforced concrete with specialized steel shutters and gas-tight doors is not cheap. How does this impact the housing market in these countries?
In Israel, it adds a significant percentage to the cost of new construction. I have seen estimates that a Mamad adds anywhere from $30,000 to $50,000 to the cost of an apartment, but it is non-negotiable. You cannot get a building permit without it. In Switzerland, it is a similar story. If you are building a house and you do not want to build a shelter, you actually have to pay a replacement fee to the local municipality, which they then use to build larger public shelters. So either way, you are paying for the protection.
I think there is a lesson there for other countries. We often treat civil defense as an afterthought or something the government will just handle when the time comes. But both the Swiss and the Israeli models show that true preparedness has to be baked into the physical infrastructure of where people live. You cannot build a bunker while the sirens are going off.
And you cannot maintain a bunker without a culture of readiness. That 10-year inspection cycle in Switzerland is a constant reminder that the peace they enjoy is a choice backed by preparation. It is the same in Israel. The Mamad is a part of daily life. Kids do their homework in there. It is a bedroom. It normalizes the idea that safety is a physical space you are responsible for.
One thing Daniel asked about was the outbreak of war and why Switzerland is so concerned. If you look at the geography, they are surrounded by NATO members. For a long time, the assumption was that any threat to Switzerland would have to come through a crumbled Europe. But in the age of long-range missiles and cyber warfare, borders matter less.
That is exactly the point the Swiss defense planners make. In a modern conflict, you do not need a tank to roll across the border to have your power grid fried or a stray missile hit a city. Their engineering reflects a desire to be an island of stability in a sea of chaos. If the rest of the continent is struggling with a total infrastructure collapse, the Swiss want to be able to close their doors, turn on their filters, and wait it out.
It is a very conservative approach to engineering. You assume the worst will happen, and you build for it. I wonder, though, about the long-term sustainability. These shelters are from the Cold War era. Are they still effective against modern weapons?
Against a direct hit from a modern bunker buster? No, nothing short of being deep inside a mountain will save you from a dedicated kinetic penetrator. But that is not the threat model for home shelters. The threat is fallout, chemical agents, and the general collapse of order. For those things, a thick concrete wall and a good filter are still the gold standard. The physics of blast waves and radiation have not changed since the 1950s.
What about the psychological engineering? We talked about the mamad being a bedroom. Does that make people more or less anxious? In Switzerland, the shelter is a dark basement you rarely visit. In Israel, it is where you sleep.
There is a lot of research on this. In Israel, having the mamad in the apartment significantly reduces the trauma of rocket attacks because it provides a sense of agency. You are not running through the streets to a public shelter, you are just moving 10 feet to a safe space. In Switzerland, the shelter is more of a dormant insurance policy. It is there, it is inspected, and then it is forgotten for another 10 years. It reflects the lower frequency of the threat.
I think the biggest takeaway for me is the difference in the definition of safety. For the Swiss, safety is isolation. For the Israelis, safety is integration. The mamad is integrated into the home, into the building, into the life of the family. The Swiss shelter is an isolation chamber.
And both are correct for their specific environments. If you have 90 seconds, you need integration. If you are looking at a 3-week fallout period, you need isolation. The engineering follows the reality. One thing I found wild in my research was the Swiss requirement for dry toilets and emergency bunks. Every shelter is supposed to have these ready to be assembled. It is not just a room, it is a life support system.
I can just imagine you, Herman, nerdily assembling a Swiss emergency bunk bed in your living room, just to see how the joints fit together.
I would be lying if I said I had not looked for the assembly diagrams. They are surprisingly efficient. It is all about modularity. The Israeli mamad is more about the shell. You bring your own bed, your own computer, your own life into it. It is a hardened version of your normal life.
We should probably touch on the technological side of this for the future. We are seeing more smart home integration with these safe rooms. In Israel, there are now systems that automatically unlock the electronic shutters when a siren goes off, or that trigger the air filtration the moment sensors detect a certain level of particulate matter.
And that is where the engineering is going. AI-driven early warning systems that can predict the impact point with incredible precision, allowing people in the safe zone to stay out, and only those in the danger zone to head in. But as we always say on this show, software cannot stop a piece of shrapnel. You still need the concrete. You still need the steel.
It always comes back to the materials science. Whether you are a neutral porcupine in the Alps or a fortress state in the Middle East, the fundamental requirement of civil defense is a physical barrier between you and the chaos. Daniel's prompt really highlights how two different cultures can take the same basic materials and build two completely different philosophies of survival.
It is the ultimate engineering trade-off. Cost versus speed versus duration. The Swiss chose duration and absolute coverage. The Israelis chose speed and structural integration. Both are masterpieces of civil engineering in their own right.
I think we have covered the specs pretty thoroughly. From the 30-centimeter walls to the 10-year inspection cycles and the ammo-less rifles. It is a sobering but impressive look at what it takes to actually protect a population.
It really is. And it makes you look at your own basement or spare room a little differently, doesn't it? You start wondering if those walls are actually reinforced or if they are just drywall and hope.
I am pretty sure my walls are made of recycled cardboard and good intentions, Herman. I might need to move to Switzerland if things get hairy, or at least hire a Swiss inspector to come look at my pantry.
Just make sure you move the wine first, Corn. They are very strict about the wine.
Noted. Well, this has been a deep dive into the engineering of survival. If you are listening and you have a mamad or a basement shelter, maybe today is the day you check the seals on your doors or make sure your ventilation crank still turns. It is a small price to pay for a lot of peace of mind.
Maintenance is the most overlooked part of engineering. A rusted bolt can turn $1 million bunker into a tomb. So, check those hinges.
On that note, we should probably wrap this up. We have gone from the peak of the Alps to the heart of the Middle East and back again.
It is a lot of concrete to process.
It really is. Let us get to some practical takeaways for the people who do not live in a country with a mandatory bunker law. What can the average listener do?
First, identify the most structurally sound part of your home. Usually that is an interior room away from windows, or a basement if it has a secondary exit. Second, think about the air. You do not need a military-grade carbon filter for most scenarios, but having a way to seal a room and provide basic filtration is a huge plus. And third, maintenance. If you have emergency supplies, check the dates. If you have a generator, run it for 15 minutes once a month. Preparedness is a habit, not a product.
And if you are in a high-rise, know your building is spine. Where is the reinforced core? Usually it is around the elevator shafts or the stairwells. That is your best bet in a structural crisis.
Well, there I go again. But you are right. Knowledge of your environment is the best engineering tool you have.
All right, I think that is a wrap on episode 1393. This has been a fascinating look at the Swiss and Israeli models. Thanks as always to our producer Hilbert Flumingtop for keeping the show running smoothly behind the scenes.
And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power the research and generation of this show. We could not do these deep dives without that kind of computational muscle.
This has been My Weird Prompts. If you enjoyed this exploration of bunkers and blast doors, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It genuinely helps more people find the show and join the conversation.
We will be back next time with another prompt from Daniel. Until then, stay safe and keep asking the weird questions.
Goodbye.
See ya.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My weird prompts, that's the close from sloth, from man, from long-eared host. My weird prompts, until next time, stay curious, keep weirding.